That's it. I can't take it anymore. I am sick of politicians, think tanks, and the mainstream media, or should I say the misinformation industrial complex, pretending that the coal and gas and oil industries are getting massive taxpayer subsidies. This is a myth that just will not die, and it gets trotted out every time someone like me so much as mentions the huge subsidies which renewable energy projects enjoy. Everything from the Renewable Energy Target to the Clean Energy Fund, and a whole host of other programs and incentives and grants. Oh, but the fossil fuel industry gets the biggest subsidies, they claim. And if pressed for a source, these people always link back to something like this. This is an annual report released by the, in my opinion, myopic hack factory known as the Australia Institute. This is the 2025 edition of their annual Fossil Fuel Subsidies in Australia report, and I'm going to have to be careful how I say what I want to say because I don't want to get myself sued. But in my opinion, about 80% of this report is honestly just some of the laziest, most dishonest, skewed and short-sighted hackery that I've ever had the misfortune to set my eyes on. And yes, I am being nice. And yet it is exactly reports like this one which are relied upon by useful idiots in the public to keep the myth of fossil fuel subsidies alive. My name's Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help people like you, busy people, to cut through the, in this case, quite frankly, the BS that we are bathing in every single day thanks to our media, our politicians, and hangers-on like the Australia Institute. And like the Australia Institute, I too rely on supporters in order to be able to do my work. Although I will say that unlike the Australia Institute, I'd never thought to beg for people to include me in their will. That's quite clever. I like it. The Australia Institute reported income in excess of $10 million last year and 45 staff, and yet somehow, while I work by myself, as you'll see in a minute, I can still rip their work to shreds in just minutes. So, if you'd like to help me to keep doing what I do, then don't write me into your will because my rent can't wait that long. Instead, please head over to topherfield.net and donate using the Buy Me a Coffee button. Or if you haven't grabbed a copy of my best-selling book, Good People Break Bad Laws, all about civil disobedience in the modern age, or my second also best-selling book, Good Christians Break Bad Laws, all about the theology of civil disobedience and why Christians should be among the first to step up when the government steps out of line, then you can get those from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com, along with my multi-award-winning DVD Battleground Melbourne, as well as my t-shirts and hoodies, and it's all available from goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. Okay, enough of that. What does this Fossil Fuel Subsidies in Australia 2025 report from the Australia Institute actually say? Well, alarmingly, they claim that Australian governments provided $14.9 billion worth of spending and tax breaks to assist fossil fuel producers and major users. And that's a lot of money, there's no doubt about that. And I hate government subsidies for any industry, even industries that I like. So if it's true that the fossil fuel industry is mooching off taxpayers and gaining a competitive advantage through government subsidies, well, please let me be the first to lay the boot in. Except that if we keep reading this report, we quickly discover that that is not what's happening at all. Now, before we dive in, as is so often the case when we're untangling truth from myth, we have to define our terms. What do we mean when we say industry subsidy? An industry subsidy would have to meet two criteria to qualify as an industry subsidy. Firstly, it would have to be industry specific, or at the very least, it couldn't be universal. If a given rule or a tax deduction or an incentive scheme applies to literally everyone, then that is not an industry subsidy. If a given tax rule applies to every single business, then it cannot be a uniquely fossil fuel industry-specific subsidy. That's just how the tax laws are. The second criteria of a subsidy is that it has to be some form of financial assistance. It's designed to help that industry or business, to give them some special competitive advantage or keep them running in some special way over and above the treatment of other businesses. So, let's dive into this report on fossil fuel subsidies and see if these subsidies actually meet either or both of those requirements. Now, there are a bunch of other small alleged subsidies listed in the summary. We'll touch on those very briefly later. But one subsidy jumps out straight away because under one single solitary line item, we find over $10 billion of the just under $15 billion in alleged subsidies. So 2/3 of this entire problem, so-called, falls under this one item. And what is this item? Well, it's a thing called the Fuel Tax Credit Scheme, which, in the loaded language that the Australia Institute favours, allegedly cost the federal government $10.2 billion in 2024-25, which makes it allegedly one of the top 20 most expensive items in the federal budget. Sounds serious. But what exactly is it? Well, first we have to remember that when you buy fuel from the petrol station, a big chunk of the price you're paying is tax. Nearly 50 cents per litre in fuel excise going straight to the government. Why? Well, the original justification for fuel excise was that this was a user-pays style tax where road users would fund road maintenance through this tax. And actually, as far as taxes go, and you all know how I feel about taxes in principle, but I'm going to put that aside for now. As far as taxes go, this is actually not a terrible idea because it does at least link the funding to the use. If someone never uses roads, they walk or ride a pushbike everywhere, then they don't have to fund the roads for the people that do use them because they're not buying any petrol. They don't pay any of the tax. And the people that do use the roads, well, they're buying the petrol. So they're paying for the roads, but typically they're using the roads to do something profitable. They're going to and from work or they're carrying out some sort of business activity. And given that they are the ones damaging the roads, well, it makes sense to make the users of the roads pay for the cost of the roads. Like I said, it's not the worst idea in the world. So putting aside how I feel about taxes, the fuel tax isn't the worst idea that anyone's ever come up with. But what about people who use that fuel off the road? And no, I'm not talking about recreational four-wheel drivers who drive along a road till they get to a track and then cruise around and have fun off the road for a little while. I'm talking about farmers with combine harvesters and farm trucks and tractors, and mines with dump trucks and enormous crushing machines, and remote locations with massive diesel generators. These people are all paying the fuel tax for the upkeep of roads which their machinery never goes onto. And if we're going to impose the fuel tax on the basis that it's to recover the cost of building and maintaining the roads, then we can't very easily justify taxing people who aren't using the public roads. That would literally contradict the entire justification for the tax in the first place. So they created a credit scheme for those businesses, the ones who use vast amounts of fuel off the road, so that they can get a tax refund on the fuel taxes they should never have had to pay in the first place. Now, why don't they just not charge the tax to begin with? Well, honestly, I don't really know. But probably something to do with them being worried that people were going to cheat and use the untaxed fuel on the road or some similar problem. I don't actually know. But the way the government decided to go about this was to tax all the fuel and then give the tax back to eligible businesses who were claiming the tax back for fuel that was burned off the road. If you're wondering just how much fuel these mining machines use, take the example of the largest dump truck in the world, which we do have here in Australia. It's the BEL AZ 75710. I know, catchy name. This truck can move 450 tons at one time. And yes, there is a Yo Mama joke in there somewhere, but honestly, can we just not? So, whilst fuel consumption will obviously vary massively depending on what the truck is doing and whether or not it's carrying a full load of rocks, it's nominally rated to be 1,300 litres of fuel per 100 kilometres. Now, to give you some perspective, that means that if you filled up the tank on your average family sedan and fed that fuel to the BEL AZ 75710, it would get approximately 4.5 kilometres before the tank would be dry. And this is just one truck in just one mine. And they all pay tax on all of the fuel for all of the vehicles when they buy it, and then they get that tax rebate back after they've burned that fuel off the road. So, the fact that this tax refund, which is not a subsidy by any sensible definition, but we'll get to that, the fact that this refund is, according to the Australia Institute, one of the top 20 most expensive items in the budget, that's actually just a measure of how much tax these companies are being forced to pay incorrectly up front and then wait to get their refund. So, that's what the fuel tax rebate scheme is. Now let's ask ourselves whether this can honestly be classified as an industry subsidy? And the answer is a resounding no. Firstly, because it's not industry specific. It applies to anyone who uses their fuel off the road, not just mining. It's also agriculture, aviation, shipping. Personally, I've never seen a container ship driving down the middle of a highway, so it won't surprise you to learn that ships don't pay the road tax on their fuel. This is not an industry-specific subsidy. This is a sensible, universal tax setting, which, if they were to change it and apply tax to off-road vehicles as well, would call into question the entire justification of the fuel tax in the first place. If we're taxing fuel to pay for the upkeep of the roads, then we can't tax the people who use all their fuel off the road. One conclusion follows the other. And because it applies to every business that uses their fuel off-road, then it is, in my opinion, deeply dishonest to call this a fossil fuel subsidy, no matter how big the numbers may be. But there is also a second test here. This alleged industry subsidy has failed the first test in that it is not industry-specific. But is it a subsidy at all? Well, I'll admit that this one is less clear-cut than the first one, but in my opinion, it is still clear enough that this is not a subsidy. There is, in my opinion, a world of difference between the government handing money over to a business, such as what they've done with countless green energy projects, versus taking less money off someone. If you pay $20,000 a year in tax and the government reduces the tax rate so that now you only pay $15,000 a year, is that really a subsidy? Is that the government spending $5,000 on you? Many politicians, commentators, and indeed many economists actually view it that way. They view reducing taxes as a form of spending. And yeah, okay, from a money on a piece of paper point of view, I can see the logic to it. But I think that is a deeply immoral way of viewing the world. Essentially, what that worldview says is that by default, everything belongs to the government. But they graciously let us keep some of it. But every bit they let us keep has come at their expense. They are spending on us every time they choose to confiscate a little bit less of our cash. That is completely upside down. I believe that logic literally flips the entire relationship between government and people. And I don't believe that any sort of reduction in taxes can, in good faith, be categorized as a subsidy. But I don't think this report was done in good faith. And I don't believe that a tax rebate is or can be a subsidy ever. But even if you disagree with me on that, it is certainly true that the fuel tax rebate is not a fossil fuel industry subsidy, because it is not industry specific, any more than, tax deductible input costs on, supplies, building supplies. That's not a building subsidy. Or a tax-deductible uniform dry cleaning is not a hotel subsidy. These are universal policies that apply to every business. These claims that the fossil fuel industry gets the most subsidies, far more than the renewables industry does, that is, in my opinion, just gaslighting. It's accusing the fossil fuel industry of doing the very thing that these green carpetbaggers are doing, living high off the taxpayer's purse. All right, so that deals with the $10 billion out of the claimed nearly $15 billion in fossil fuel industry subsidies, and I don't have time to go through the rest in detail, but suffice to say that, look, some of what the Australia Institute has listed here is valid, and there are some things on this list that the taxpayer should not be funding. But a lot of this list, honestly, I don't want to harp about it, but in my opinion, this is just lazy, dishonest, skewed, and short-sighted hackery, masquerading as intellect. Oh, and before I finish, can we all just stop for a moment and enjoy the breathtaking hypocrisy of the Australia Institute whinging about tax rebates while they themselves are a tax-deductible gift recipient, meaning that their donors enjoy a tax rebate out of the $10 million in gifts that the Australia Institute has received, money which they've spent in part having a whinge about tax rebates. If they didn't have double standards, they would have no standards at all. My name is Topher Field. This is the Topher Project, and I help busy people like you to myth-bust muppets like the Australia Institute and to have answers for the idiots that you may find yourself unlucky enough to have to talk to. I am 100% viewer supported. I don't have the luxury of patrons or bequests in the wills of useful idiots like what the Australia Institute enjoys. But what I do have is a buy me a coffee button on my website, topherfield.net, as well as books, DVDs, t-shirts, hoodies, and more at goodpeoplebreakbadlaws.com. So support my work and help me to keep myth busting and telling the truth in the face of the misinformation industrial complex. Thank you for watching to the end. Please like, comment, subscribe, and as always, stay free.